Hello, friends. Today we are going to learn about the topic database as a service, in which we are going to learn about what database as a service is defined as, who uses database as a service, what are the benefits of database as a service, and where the market is going with database as a service in cloud computing services. Database as a service. Database as a service, more commonly known as managed databases, took off, or that service came into existence when AWS, that is Amazon Web Stores or Web Services, introduced its relational database services, that is RDS, in the year 2009. Since then, it has become the fastest growing cloud service, with some estimates projecting a market of $320 billion by 2025. The reason for this meteoric growth is the proven value of database as a service in enabling a fast time to market by improving productivity, standardization, and data security. What database as a service is defined as? Here, the term database as a service, or DBAAS, refers to software that enables users to set up, operate, and scale databases using a common set of abstractions or primitives without having to either know nor care about the exact implementations of those abstractions for the specific database. For example, a developer could instantiate a database instance using the same set of application programming interface calls or UI clicks or user interface clicks, regardless of whether the database was MySQL, Oracle, or MongoDB. Then, similarly, the IT admin user could request a backup of the database or create and resize a database cluster using the same cell, regardless of the particular database being used. It is the platform's responsibility, that means the platform which is providing database as a service, it is its responsibility to implement backup, cluster resizing, or any other abstract operation correctly for each of the underlying databases that perform, or databases that the platform supports. Now, the setup for database as a service. Setting up database involves provisioning or provisioning a virtual machine on which it runs, installing the database, and configuring it according to a set of parameters which is being provided there or given to you. IT administrators managing the platform can choose to set up databases for their consumers or enable a self service model in which developers and development operations or operationals create databases either through an enterprise portal or SDK, or even using automation tools like Terraform. The self service model has the advantage of zero IT intervention, freeing up IT admins for more important tasks. Using database as a service, the time required to set up a database can be reduced from weeks to minutes. Then, operate. How to operate, or operation is being performed in database as a service. Once a database has been set up, that means now the setup process is being completed, the platform is responsible for the back-end operations to maintain it in good health. This include configuration management, automating backups, or enabling easy restore when needed, patches and upgrades, data recovery, service monitoring, both for databases and the underlying infrastructure, and more are included in operator operation part of the database as a service. All of these capabilities are provided to the IT administrator as easy single click operations rather than complex procedures they would have been without a database as a service platform. To accommodate increased usage of an application as it evolves and matures, the platform should automatically scale up database instances as needed according to a set of policies. For example, as usage grows beyond a certain threshold, data from a master instance can be automatically distributed to one or more read replica instances. Once data has been distributed over multiple instances, one of the read replicas can also be used for the failover. Now, database as a service on infrastructure as a service. Here, database as a service is often delivered as a component of a more comprehensive platform which may provide additional services such as infrastructure as a service. The database as a service solution here would request resources from the underlying infrastructure as a service, which would automatically manage the provisioning, compute, storage, and networking as needed, essentially removing the need for IT to be involved in it. Here, with the help of diagram, we would see that this is the underlying hardware. Then we have this infrastructure as a service, which is the abstraction of compute, storage, and networking. Then here it has compute services, which is virtual servers, object storage, that is the buckets where you can store those objects, block storage, file systems. Now above that we have this database as a service. Here you have this self-service on demand database consumption coupled with automation of the operations, and then above database as a service we have this platform as a service to be accessed by the users or the consumers. Then who uses database as a service? It is important to understand that like other cloud technologies, database as a service has two primary consumers. First one, the IT organizations which manages and maintains the cloud. Second, the end user who consumes the cloud resources, typically developers and the development operations or DevOps. The IT organization deploys database as a service solution enabling end users, that means developers and DevOps, to provision a database of their choice on demand from a catalog of supported databases, which could include both relational and non relational databases. The IT organization can configure the database as a service to support specific releases of these software titles and can further restrict the configurations that specific users can provision. For example, here developers may only be allowed to provision databases with small memory footprint using traditional disks, while DevOps could provision higher capacity servers with SSDs. Finally, the IT organizations here they can set up policies for standard database operations like backups, disaster recovery, and security policies to ensure that the data is properly saved from time to time to allow for recovery when required. Typically, an end user would access the database as a system or database as a service system through a portal that offers a selection of different databases titles, and in a variety of different configuration options also. With a few clicks, the user specifies the required database and its corresponding configuration for provisioning. The database as a service system quickly provisions the database and returns a queryable endpoint such as MySQL. The user can then use this directly in a application or in an application. The database as a service system provides simple mechanisms to add users, create schemas, and grant permissions to different users as required by the application. Now, what are the benefits of database as a service? Database as a service solution provides an organization a number of benefits, the main ones being developer agility, IT productivity, application reliability and performance, application security. Now, we will examine each of them, how they are, or we could say we will have a short description or brief description about those benefits. First one is the developer agility. Deploying a database is a multi step process, including the provisioning of compute, storage, and networking components, configuring them properly, and installing the database software. In the most enterprises, this process must go through the organization's IT department and is typically something like the following things. Say, for example, when developer opens a request in the IT ticketing systems, the ticket sits in the queue until it gets to the top of the list according to the IT priorities. Then, in developer agility, it evaluates tickets, and then if the request is approved, goes about allocating the required compute, storage, and networking resources needed for the developer's database. In some cases, each of these is also handled by a separate sub department which has its own ticketing system and set of priorities. IT configures the allocated resource. It installs, or IT installs and configures the database to utilize the underlying infrastructure according to its internal policies. It provides, or IT, that means information technology, provides the developer with an entry point to the database, and the developer takes it from there. Not only this process prone to errors and omissions, it is also extremely time consuming. The above series of actions that might be completed in hours or days can be stretched to days, weeks, and even months. This is unacceptable for developers who are trying to shorten development cycles and release faster. A database as a service solution radically improves provisioning time by automating the process described above. The IT organization establishes the standards by which databases will be provisioned and configures the database as a service accordingly. That means, as per the need of the hour. One database provisioning is standardized and the database as a service is configured. Deploying a database is a task that can be handed back to the developers who can now provision databases for themselves without requiring any intervention by IT through a simple API, that means application programming interfaces call, or a few clicks on a user interface portal. This is not only, or this particular thing not only gives developers the agility they need by enabling them to provision databases in a single click self service model, but also databases will always be provisioned in a consistent manner that is aligned with the best practices for that particular database. Once in operation, complex database operations like resizing a cluster boil down to a simple application programming interface call that shields the developer from the details of how this operation should be performed for the specific database and version. The abstraction provided by database as a service handles all of that and allows the developer to focus the energy on the application rather than underlying databases. Finally, the activities of a developer are often iterative and it involves spinning up, using, and then destroying database servers over multiple cycles of the development. A database as a service solution allows the final step in this process to be automated, securely erasing all storage used for the databases and ensuring that all the resources are released while preserving data integrity at all times. Then, next comes IT productivity. IT is responsible for day to operations of the enterprise databases, including like tuning, configuration, monitoring, patching, upgrading, resizing, periodic backups, and so on. All the things that must be done to keep databases in proper working order. As enterprises grow, and with them the number and types of databases that must be managed and maintained, IT resources get stretched very thin. That means explaining very thin here, it means explaining the long lead time that developers have to wait before IT provisions them with a database. Database as a service solutions enable information technology to manage a much larger number of databases by treating them as cattle rather than pets. Another thing here is that by providing abstractions for and automating tasks involving with day to operations, our database as a service solution vastly simplifies IT's job, that means information technology's job, allowing operations like upgrades and configuration changes to be done on a fleet of databases with a single action. That means it need not to perform various actions for that. With a single action, it can do the task. Once relieved from micromanaging all of an enterprise's data, IT or information technology can focus more on activities like establishing the standards of operation for the enterprise and providing quicker service for the developers who they serve. Applications reliability and performance, the another benefit for database as a service here is modern database as a service solutions make it easy to keep your databases highly available and running at peak performance. Through support for read replicas, in the event of a failure, the system automatically reroutes traffic to a replica, ensuring system availability at all times. The system also monitors the databases to identify increased demand on resources. Using scaling policies based on resource usage threshold, you can or the consumer can configure the system to automatically scale out by provisioning additional resources as demand increases, and then scale back in once demand is reduced, releasing resources for other application. That means if this particular physical resources, this is application 1, 2, 3, and so on. So this application using this resource, then when it is done with this resource, it will free up this resource and then will go to the other physical resource. Similarly, other and other, so it is freeing up those resources for other processes there. Then comes application security. So here many database engines natively provide security features such as data encryption, both at rest and in transit, each using its own data structures and application programming interfaces. A database as a service solution provides consistent management of security for all the different types of databases you might use in the organization while adding some security features of its own. In addition to native data encryption, the consumer or the client might look for things like end to end network security with micro segmentation, virtual private networks, and security groups. A database as a service solution might also integrate with common enterprise user stores such as LDAP and Active Directory for user authentication, and then apply fine grained access control via different permission policies. While anything that is as a service is immediately associated with the public cloud, enterprise database platform is a database as a service solution that is installed in enterprise data centers and edge locations. While most database as a service offerings will provide things like self service provisioning, life cycle management, and auto scaling, there are some challenges with public cloud database as a service solutions that are solved when you go on premises. Thank you.